How would we sell this podcast? And then tell me the best way to sell this podcast.
The best way to sell this podcast is all right. Dr. Dinin, welcome back to another episode of ThoughtWave. We're glad that you are here. ThoughtWave is where we discuss tips, tricks, and hacks for audience builders.
Sorry. Did we start? Hey, Chris. How are you?
You know we started. You know we started, Dr. Dinin.
How did you have a good day today? We didn't even say hello first.
Well, thank you. I agree. How are you?
Doesn't sales start with small talk?
Sales does. You know what that's called, actually?
What is
rapport. Building rapport.
We need better rapport before we start a podcast. I don't want to just start a podcast with you. I want rapport.
You want rapport. You need me to warm you up a lit'll bit. I get it.
Yeah. How was your day, Chris? How was your day? What'd you do today?
Everybody wants to get warmed up a little bit, Dr. D.
What'd you do? What's going on?
Okay. I actually gave a talk to a group of entrepreneurs today.
Oh.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
It's a bunch of university entrepreneurs from Duke, UNC, and NC State. And I know. We have our allegiances. I don't know if the people listening know what our allegiances are, but they are with one of the three. We'll just leave it at that. We don't want to.
If you can guess.
If you can guess, go for it. And so what they're trying to do, actually, what these entrepreneurs are trying to do is they've incubated technology within these universities, and they're trying to figure out, how am I going to license it or turn it into a business, spin it out of the university? And so the big question that we had on our plates today that I was brought in to talk about was, how do I package, price, and sell my product? You know, what's the best way to sell my product? So we spent about, 45 minutes talking about the ins and outs of pricing, packaging, and the best way to sell a product.
All right, give me the 15-second. What's the best way to sell my product? Give me the secrets.
Give you the secret. I don't know. I feel like we should charge for this podcast because everybody out there is probably wondering
how would we sell this podcast? And then tell me the best way to sell this podcast.
The best way to sell this podcast is to get customers, to get listeners. That's step number one. Step number two is then to brag about it to everybody.
I'm already posting to social media about it. So you got this room of people, and you're trying to explain the best way to sell a product. Out of curiosity, you've been doing sales leadership for a long time. Do you have a framework for sales? How do you, if I hand you a new product, I know this is a big, broad question, but if I hand you a new product, what's the process you're going to go through to figure out the best way to sell it?
Oh man, you love to toss out the hard questions first, don't you?
Right.
So if I was to get a new product, the first thing I would do is try to learn everything I could about that product. What are the features, et cetera? Then I go through a little exercise that we call the so what exercise. So I said, it has this feature. And then somebody says, so what? And I go, well, that's important because of this. And they go, well, so what if that's important? Well, then I go, well, that's important because of this. And what that helps do is it helps you figure out what are all the most important aspects of your product. And then what you can do on top of that is you build the questions that you're going to ask a potential customer to find their problems that relate to that product. So typically speaking, I start there, try to get an understanding of it, and I try to find stories and analogies that help articulate the value of that. So once I have these stories and analogies, you know what I do? I go talk to people immediately, and I say, hey, I've got this new thing. I think that it's going to be valuable to this group of people. What do you think? And I get customer feedback. And as I get more customer feedback, I get more stories, more use cases about how my product might be used. And then I continue to narrow down to what's called your ICP, or ideal customer profile. And once I find that ideal customer profile and I've talked to a few of those customers, I actually start to pitch the product. But in order to know, and what I mean by pitch the product, I mean actually ask for a sale. And what's really important to know is you've got to figure out, how am I going to price this thing? Because you're not just pulling a number out of thin air and saying, hey, this is a number. Sometimes you do that, but most of the time you don't. But I'll kick it back to you and say, you teach entrepreneurship at Duke. If I was to say, what are the things that determine what somebody will pay, what would you say?
So what are the things that determine what somebody will pay?
Throw out anything that comes to mind.
I was at an earlier stage of entrepreneurship. I said, but the discover stage, but the sales, that's beyond me. No, I would say like kind of market expectations. Right? So like what they're currently paying for, to basically get that job done is probably a key indicator. This feels wishy-washy, but I feel like there's like a sense of perception of what it should. I don't know how to describe that, but
yeah,
I know a lot of sales work. You try to do price anchoring. So I want to try to get someone thinking, here's what it's going to cost along their line, so they have a sense of what it should be. And then I don't know what a third is. That was a great question. I don't know.
You're right on the right track. Okay. So there's a few things. Like one of the things that you were alluding to, you weren't sure what to call, like the perception of what this thing should cost. Well, that usually is based on some element of value. Okay. So I'm going to pay this money and I expect a certain amount of commensurate value back for that thing. All right. So there's this general gut feel that we all have that, I'm probably not going to be paying $10 for a stick of gum. The commensurate value back is not high. Unless you're telling me that gum is going to cure the cavities in my teeth, I'm going to save $150 of going to get that filled. I don't know how much it costs to do that, but
you've got a great dentist, cheap dentist.
I just don't have any cavities. Here we go. The other thing that you're going to notice is the comparison part, right? You brought that up as well. So when you're looking at pricing something, what already exists in the market, that's kind of close to that thing. So if you are Uber and you're just starting out offering this as a new service, what are you going to use as an analog?
Taxis.
You're going to use taxis. And so chances are you don't want to, 5x the cost of a taxi on Uber. That's going to be outside of the bounds unless maybe you're a limo service or something like that. The next thing is, and historically, if you took a coffee cup and you slapped a Starbucks logo on it, how much more could you charge for that cup of coffee?
$50 more per cup.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah. We're all poor because of Starbucks, right? Actually, drink local. Drink local. So those are some good examples, some good ideas of what determines price. There's other things, supply and demand. When there's not a whole lot of supply of something and there's high demand, you can choose what you want. That's why there's like price gouging laws when a disaster hits and there's not a lot of gasoline, because low supply, high demand, you could charge through the roof for that. And then another key part of all of this is, what's the experience that the consumer wants to go through in order to buy your product? So if it's a white glove, high touch experience, you're going to want to charge or be able to charge more for that. If it's a self-service situation, like we just saw, I don't know if you saw the news today, that Amazon is launching the ability to buy cars through their platform now, specifically with Hyundai, I think it is.
All right. Do I get Prime delivery?
It would be amazing.
Same day?
Somebody drives by and drops it off at your house and it hands you the keys. How amazing would that be?
I guess that'd be convenient.
It'd be really
weird.
It'd be so weird for us because we're not used to buying things that way. But there's a whole host of people who don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to talk to a salesperson. They just want to know what the price is and they want it to show up at their doorstep. It's really interesting. So all of those things put together start to help us triangulate around how I should price something. But there's one really important element in pricing that we haven't talked about, and that is you and your psychology as a person pitching the price. So what ultimately that means is, if I am not confident, or I'm feel like I just bought a home, or I just bought a new car like we were just talking about, and I'm feeling cash poor right now, I may not pitch prices confidently as I should. Because if I come to you, Dr. Dinin, and I'm like, it's gonna cost $1 million, does it feel worth $1 million to you?
Not a penny more, for sure.
No. Right? You're going to be like, does it really cost $1 million? This feels weird. No, thank you. And so you also are an element in this equation about how you are able to price and get value in return for whatever product you have. I mean, I'm sure your students come to you and ask you about these types of questions all the time. So like, how do you help them with that?
I feel almost stupid saying this. I spend a lot of time thinking about pricing from the, how do I set the right price perspective, as opposed to asking this question of what is someone willing to pay. And it's a great thing that now I'm thinking I really need to add into, how do we think about what should I set my price at? Because a lot of the conversations I wind up having with entrepreneurs are around, where they always want to go is, how much does it cost me to produce it? And I actually always kind of push back on it because I'm like, that's actually not, you can be leaving a lot of money on the table if you go kind of on a, how much does it cost me to produce it side. And then alternately, you can wildly, I guess, not undercut yourself. I guess the word I'm looking for is you can, if it's all about production and it just costs you a lot to produce it, you're kind of missing the fact that over time you're going to optimize, right? So in the beginning, it should cost you more and you're probably going to sell it for less. But ideally, a startup is a dynamic thing. And this is what I talk with my entrepreneurs about a lot, right? Is over time, you want your cost to go down and the price you can charge to go up, right? Like that's the goal. And so it's not really about fixating on what's the perfect price because there is no perfect price. It's about understanding that pricing is dynamic. And so you're working within a market and you're trying to, a lot of early entrepreneurship is trying to figure out where is that pricing sweet spot. And that's a lot of trial and error and experimentation. And then there's a lot of psychology we talk about with it. One thing I find that's, is from my own experience is, I had a product that was, it was kind of a CRM sales enablement kind of tool. And at first we went after the, kind of the really SMB market and even the, kind of the early entrepreneur market. And so we're selling this thing for, it's like $29.99 a month or $39.99 or whatever it is. And eventually we wound up charging, $499 a month, essentially $5,000 a year for the same exact product, and actually even a kind of a less user-friendly version. What we found is like when you self-serve something, it has to be much more user-friendly, and people want to pay a lot less. But when you enterprise something, when you bring it up, when you have more of a kind of a hand-holding sales process, the product itself can be much less user-friendly, and people will pay a lot more. And it's really hard to make a really easy to use, intuitive software that people can just get and figure out on their own. And so it's just wild that you actually charge a lot less for this thing that's really easy to use. And so we found that actually going up market and charging more for the same exact thing really made our job a lot easier in terms of what we had to build. Anyway, that kind of got away from where we got to pricing. But so what we found in terms of pricing was the reason we kind of hit at $499 a month was it turns out that at $500, a lot of companies at $500 a month or more, they have to get some sort of approval process to put it on a credit card. But when something was less than $500, the person we were selling to, our target customer, could put it on a credit card without having to go through any kind of higher level approvers. So our sale was just much quicker at $499 a month than at $501 a month. And so that's how we hit on $499 a month, which was, there was no basis in how much it cost us to deliver it, how much it cost us to develop it, how much people perceived it. It was purely on like what was the logistics of the organizations we were selling into.
That's so interesting. And it totally makes sense because during sales processes, one of the most common questions that I love to ask is when you've purchased something like this before, what process did you have to go through? All right. So when you start asking that question, they'll start talking about, oh, well, I had to do this, this, and this. And then I love to follow up with a question like what you're talking about, which is there any price point that just makes this really easy for you to say yes to, that you don't have to go get other levels of approval? And they're like, oh yeah, anything under 10,000 I can just do.
And great, $9,999. Let's go, baby.
Exactly.
What a coincidence.
What a coincidence that much, right? Which is why a lot of people are nervous to like respond when they're asked that question. But a lot of times, both people just want to get the deal done and out the door. And if there's that much value for it, they'll say yes. And one thing that I liked about what you said earlier in terms of talking with your students and starting with what's the cost of to make the product or the manufacturing cost of the product, what that gets you to at the very least is a floor.
Yeah.
So it's a place to start. Now, to your point, you may be starting too low, but you can start to ask yourself, what's the margin that I want to be able to make on this product? So that might get you a little bit closer. And then you go test that price. And the rule of thumb I like to use is if I pitch price 3 times and I get 3 yeses with no belly aching, it's time to up the price. time to up the price. And that's one of the first things oftentimes that when I am brought in to work with a CEO or a founder that I'll do with them is we'll look at the pricing, we'll look at how often people are saying yes, and if it's too often, we'll say, all right, boop, let's raise that price. Because what you'll find is, at 9 people saying yes at one lower price may equal far less revenue than 6 people saying yes at a much higher price. And the overhead to manage that customer base potentially is a lot less. You got fewer total number of customers that you have to worry about at any given moment. It's one strategy though. That's a revenue optimization. Sometimes you want to land grab, then there's a different strategy for that.
Yeah, there's this something that I always was fascinated by when I was a young entrepreneur is it felt like nobody was ever going after the low end of the market. And I feel like new entrepreneurs, they dive in and they just go for the low end of the market, the cheap thing. And inevitably, any successful company moves up market. And in the end, so then what it does is it leaves that gap in the low end of the market, and the company comes in and why is no one going after this? And what you quickly realize is, if I charge 10x more for my product, it doesn't take me 10x more to sell this product. It maybe takes me 4, 5, 6x more, but not 10x more. So it just makes a heck of a lot more sense to get less customers, charge a lot more. And oh, by the way, when I get less customers, it's less customer support headaches that I have to deal with, and less, and less, product support or product power, for bandwidth or whatever it is that goes into building this thing. So it actually saves money all around to have less customers that you're charging more for, and that's why everything kind of always moves up market. It's a weird phenomenon that I was just fascinated by, and I see tons of entrepreneurs going after the cheap things. Let's get those cheap customers. Nope.
Don't want to start there unless you have to. And it was Crossing the Chasm that really talked about that phenomenon, right? Like this idea of as people go up market, it leaves this market below that gives your competitors a chance to get a foothold.
So talk to me, because now I'm just going to pick your brain, and audience, I apologize, but these are questions I've been meaning to ask Chris for a long time. Give me your sales, what are your pro sales? You're in a sales pitch. What are the Chris Leithe secrets to sales?
Oh man, wait, you want this to be a class on selling? All right,
let's do it. Give me your best. Actually, give me your third best, so that way people have to come back and listen to another episode.
Right. Yeah.
Third best.
All right. So, I just can't give my third best. Yeah. We always got to bring the best here.
Okay.
So here's the first thing that I always train my teams on whenever I'm training them is sales starts with empathy. Always. Full stop. And what I mean by that is we all think we know what empathy means. It's like, I know how you're feeling and all this kind of stuff. And yes, that's true, but I mean even a deeper layer. So what I usually will walk my teams through is a meditation, a mindfulness experience where they're actually going through and imagining what it's like to be their customer waking up in the morning. Do they get coffee in the morning? Are they checking their emails first thing? Do they have kids? Do they not have kids? Do they have a drive to work? What happens when they get to work? What do they do? Is it at home? Is it in the office? Do they have people reporting to them? What kind of problems do they have? And we walk through this mindfulness exercise because what usually ends up happening is you start to understand you are not the most important part of their day. And once you realize that you are not the most important part of their day, it changes the entire way you approach the sales process, because then you start to realize that I have to make this interesting, engaging, entertaining to this person that I'm going to be talking to. And I also have to be very quick at finding out how am I going to make this person more money first of all. And people may be thinking, but my product, it saves the trees and it's humanitarian and all this wonderful thing. And I'll say, yes, I'm sure it does. And that's really wonderful. But unfortunately, most times we can't lead with that. We have to lead with what's called being closest to the money. I know you've heard me say this before, and it is not a cynical way of looking at the world. It's just once you check that box of showing people how you're going to provide value, ROI, money on whatever it is that you're providing them, it puts them at ease. Because if we start looking at, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, well, what do we need to do first? We need to feed, clothe, house ourselves first to feel safe. And what is the primary mechanism for doing that in our current society? It's money.
Dollar bills.
It's money. So we start there. We start with what's closest to the money. We start with empathy. We put those two things together. We put that need to bed, and then we start talking about all the other wonderful things that your product is going to be able to do to make their life better.
This is one of the things that my academic background, it's sort of my humanist academic background is like money and, and business is like a 4-letter word in that realm. And people hate to talk about money. And I think that rubbed off on me very early on. And so when I was, first into kind of my entrepreneurial career, I was always I still have a hesitancy to talk about money because it's like this forbidden thing. I come from this almost like the English department I came from is like the home of socialism or like the socialist thought, right? So it was like, oh, money is this, this functional evil in the world. And, and that's just not what I've come to really tell my students. And I try to embrace myself is that, money isn't evil. I always have these students, they come to me and they pitch their idea. And it's the funniest that you would get a kick out of this because they'll pitch their idea and they'll go through the whole thing. Maybe sometimes like a decent idea. And then they'll end with like, and here's the best part. We're going to give all our profits to charity. Fireworks and streamers. And it's like, whoa. You're going to give up, how are you going to grow your company if you're giving all your profits to, you got to reinvest those things, right? And you got to create motivations for people and like the money. And so it comes down to this idea that, I think a lot of people get this impression that money is evil, but of course money isn't evil. Now what you do with your money can be evil. How you get your money can be evil, but money itself can be a wonderful good in the world too. And so the way I've really gotten over my kind of hesitancy and anyone out there listening to this who struggles to make that ask of money is to understand, no, that money isn't evil. Money can be this wonderful, powerful good in the world. How do we use it that way? And demonstrate when you're in that sales process that the money exchange here is an exchange of good, of value in the world. And so I love your kind of discussion about empathy. One of the things that I always tell people when I'm giving advice on how to give a great sales pitch, the thing I always start with is, not that you asked, not that you even need my advice, but maybe someone out there needs my advice.
I want to know,
You want to know, I always say good salespeople are really great at asking questions. It's this fundamental misconception. Everyone thinks salespeople are great at talking. They can just chat you up and convince you of anything. And it is wildly the opposite. The best salespeople I've ever met, including you, you are a danger every time I talk to you because I know you're just like digging in and trying to like figure me out. And like, what's going on with him today? Oh, you're looking a little, your voice octave is, half a pitch lower than it normally is. Are you feeling sad and frustrated because, you're
Oh, no.
Anyway, you've got too much empathy, Chris. But what happens, right, is great salespeople have wonderful empathy, and they use that and they ask lots of questions. Because when you ask someone lots of questions, you get to know them, you get to understand their problem, and then you know exactly how to sell them your solution because you know how to place it into the needs of their problem. And just as importantly is that you can also quickly tell if this is not the right customer for your product. And being quick to say, you know what, actually, I can't help you is one of the secrets to being a great salesperson because it builds more, you will build more trust with any person you're talking to if you're on a sales call and you say, you know what, you actually shouldn't be buying this isn't good for you. And the best sale I ever had, I always say this, the best sales call I ever had took me less than 5 minutes. And it was one of my advisors, one of my mentors at the time, he was teaching me this process. You got to ask questions in the sales process. And so he says, next time you have a sales call, just start with asking questions. So I got on the phone, I said, the first question I asked, instead of pitching my company, I used to just dive in, hey, here's what we got, here's all the features. The person was like, so how did you find us? And the guy went, he said, I was Googling and I found this thing and here's what, this problem I'm trying to solve. And after, 30 seconds of telling me what problem he was solving, I heard, I'm like, oh, well, that's not what our company does. And he goes, oh, well, what does your company do? And I go, oh, well, this is kind of what our company does. And, 45 seconds later, I'd finished telling him what our company does. He goes, oh, well, I don't need that. I'm like, yeah, you don't. But hey, I actually have this other company that I use that does what you want. So you should check them out. And he's like, oh, thanks. And that was the end of the call. And it was over in less than 5 minutes. And I said it was a great sales call because, we were booked for 45 minutes. So I had 40 extra minutes of my day. And that was amazing, right? And then 3 months later, out of the blue, I get an email from this guy and he goes, hey, we need the thing that your company does now. Where do I put my credit? Can I give you my credit card to buy? And that was it because I had built so much trust with him that he had no doubt I was the person to handle it when he did need what I was selling him.
Absolutely. And what you're keying in on here, and what I think the secret sauce is like a genuine desire to help people, just without regard to how it's going to benefit you. Like that to me is the secret of all of this. When I get on a call with somebody, what's going through my head is not how can I sell this person? What's going through my head is, can I help this person? And to your point, it can be by making another connection for them. It can be with whatever product I'm selling. It can be advice or whatever the case may be. But there's this genuine desire to be a consultant for this person. And if you act as a consultant, what book really popularized this was The Challenger Sale. That book really popularized this idea of being the trusted advisor, the consultant, pushing back on what people think they need and helping them get to what they actually need. And that's a really important skill to have, because a lot of times what you said comes true, where you'll be talking to somebody and be like, I don't think this is going to be a good fit. And what's very scary for a lot of founders and CEOs, especially early on, is to say that out loud. Because what are they thinking? They're like, man, I need this win. I need the money. I need to fund my company. And that desire and that need, which is a real need, right? We were just talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's a base need. You've got to eat. But on the other side is your integrity and your values and wanting to stay in alignment with that. And if you stay in alignment with your values, you will always end up well. And it's so important, because that's the biggest knock against salespeople ultimately is, you've got the classic image of the shiesty kind of salesperson.
Used car salesman.
Right? That's trying to pull one over. And I feel bad for all the used car salesmen out there, because they get a bad rap, and there's a lot of great ones out there, but unfortunately it's just become the thing that's synonymous with that. The only thing you really have is your integrity and your trustworthiness when you're in sales, and really in anything, but especially in sales, because it's a art of relationship, and it's an art of listening and asking questions. And when you put all those things together, you've got to be true and in line with those values to do it really well.
And by the way, to anyone who's listening to this, and something I'm often telling my entrepreneurs who are hesitant about sales is, if you don't feel comfortable asking for someone to pay you for the value, service, whatever product you're giving them, maybe it means you're building the wrong thing, right? That should be clue number one, because if you genuinely believe the thing you're creating is a real value, well, then of course you should be excited to say, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you. And so if you have that hesitancy, and I can definitely think back to some companies where I felt bad about selling it. And in retrospect, it's because I wasn't selling them something that I genuinely felt good about. And now that I am in a position where I sell things that I feel good about, I never feel uncomfortable. I know you're getting a bargain at twice the price, because the thing I'm creating here is an enormous value.
And oftentimes when I have sales folks on my team that are struggling and they've hit a lull or something like that, and I'll go and listen to their calls with them. So we'll listen to a call together, and it's always an awkward experience, because nobody likes hearing the sound of their own voice. Like I'm hesitant always to listen to our episodes of our podcast, because I'm like, oh man, I said right like a bazillion times. We're working on it. We're getting there. However, when you do this with your sales team or somebody on your team, what you find really quickly is where in their voice are they getting caught up. And so you'll hear all of a sudden they get to pricing and they're like, it's this. And you can hear hesitancy, you can hear fear in their voice. And one of the things I love to do that you made me think of is I would come in and sometimes I would say, hey, we need to resell you on this product. We need to help you become a believer again. And, maybe they had a difficult sales call, last week, and that's still kind of lingering in their minds, where somebody told them that their product sucked and that nobody was ever going to buy it. And how could you sell such a thing? Or they heard somebody email into support that said something like that. And they're sitting there and they're questioning themselves. And sometimes what you need to come in and do is you need to just reinforce your belief. Yeah, not everybody is going to find value in your product. Not everybody is going to love it. Not everybody is going to have a great experience with it, but you can't lose faith. You have to keep going. You have to keep reinforcing your belief in that thing. As long as it's there, as long as it's honest and it's true, keep reinforcing your belief. And when you bring that to the table, that's a powerful sales tool in and of itself, because you believe in it. And that's why I've only ever been able to be involved in companies that are selling something that I actually believe in.
I just had a conversation yesterday morning with an entrepreneur who is Dr. Dinin. I feel terrible. I'm struggling to sell my thing. Nobody seems to want it. And I said, okay, well, how many people have you tried to sell to? And he's like, well, I've had 4 calls and none of them bought. And I had to put it in context. I said, well, a good conversion rate on sale, like a great conversion rate is like 5%, right? Like if you were knocking 5% out of an average project, you're probably doing all right. Okay, so that means 1 in 20 means you've got to have 5%. By the way, I started asterisk. I saw your face. It depends what product. For the product he was selling, it was a 5%er. And so it was like, so you need to have 20 calls. You need to talk, 20 people need to see it before you can expect a sale. So if you think after 4 calls, that nobody wants this is a bad thing to sell, then you're missing the point, right? There's data, there's statistics here. You've got to always kind of rely on the statistics and know that there's a conversion rate. There's not 100% conversion. There's not even close to 100% conversion rate. And if you go into sales thinking every person you talk to should be a buyer, that's where huge inefficiencies come in. Because then what you try to do is you try to oversell, you try to promise things that aren't there, you try to convince people. And instead of trying to convince people who aren't good buyers to buy, just move on, right? You should be in a market where there's a big enough customer base that if you don't get this person, there's a bunch of other people after that person who could be good customers. And so, there's this kind of combination of, there's this importance to, that's something I learned in the SaaS process, right? I never understood in sales till I got deep into SaaS that there was a qualification process in sales, right? So it doesn't just go from lead to sales call, it's lead qualification call, and make sure that person is a good potential buyer before you ever try to sell them. And if not, get them out of the sales process as quickly as possible because it's good for both of you. It's not ruthless. You're not being mean to the person. You're saving them time and you're saving yourself time. And the most important asset we have is our time.
Absolutely. And one thing that to add on to this that you're making me think about, when you just said, in the SaaS sales process, and for anybody listening who is unsure of what SaaS is, software as a service, recurring software, think about it like maybe you pay for a subscription to Canva or to Spotify or something like that. It's this recurring SaaS product, something that you use, a tool. So you talked about there being multiple steps in a sales process. And this is something that I get asked about all the time. It's like, do I need to do a qualification call? Do I need to do a demo? Do I need to do a contract review or a pricing call or whatever? How do I divvy up the sales process? And you're bringing up a great point, is that a large part of any sales process is qualifying a customer in or out. If your product is for cats and you're talking to a dog owner right now, that person is not qualified. They do not have a cat. They may get a cat in the future and they may become more qualified then. So it doesn't mean you should not follow up with them down the road. You put them in your nurture campaign or whatever, but it means this is not where I should spend my time right now because they're not qualified for the product that I'm selling. So based on that, when you've seen a bunch of entrepreneurs come through just like I have, what do you tend to see? What elements do you tend to look for in a sales process when you're trying to guide somebody on how to create that sales process?
The biggest thing is going to be the price of your product. So if you've got a self-serve product versus, what's the phrase I'm looking here for the opposite of self-serve? But people are going to have to sell it.
Yeah.
The opposite, unself-serve.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's late. But so the big part is pricing. If you're out of sales, I mean, this goes back to that Amazon, right? That's why it's so interesting. Like this really expensive product, a car, being a self-serve product. Traditionally, that's just not where you tend to have self-serve products. But so it'll be interesting to follow that. But usually the big qualifier is this a self-serve product? And then from there, it really dictates a lot is, how big is the market you're targeting? And, if it's a very large market, then you're going to do a lot more automations, a lot more kind of marketing-led sales and customer acquisition. Whereas as you get more enterprise, more smaller, more niche, that's when you're going to get more hand-holding direct sales.
Direct sales,
there we go. So it's basically, it's purely on kind of size of market and price is usually my kind of two big factors that I guide people on. And there's a lot of the questions I get is which one is better? And the answer is always totally depends. Depends on the market you're in. And it depends on your skill set. Personally, my skill set is much more attuned to has always been much more attuned to direct sales than top of the funnel than building big marketing campaigns. I was much more kind of targeted and strategic to my sales process. That's just what I kind of developed a better knowledge for, and that was more enterprise sales. Now, at this point in my career, I wonder if that's changed a little. I feel like maybe I've changed my tune a bit as I think more about audience building and big brands. But, again, know yourself. Each entrepreneur is different, and you have different skill sets. And, I think there's something important to be said is, make sure that the product in the company matches the entrepreneur. And I don't think people do that enough, right? They'll go and they'll be like, well, I should create an AI product because AI is hot. It's like, well, AI is hot, but if you're you've got 3 generations of owning restaurants and being a restaurateur, and you grew up around restaurants, then maybe you should be in the restaurant business because that's probably what right? If you're really good at fundraising, well, then a venture-backed company makes a lot of sense for you. But if you suck at fundraising, don't know anything about it, maybe a venture-backed company doesn't make sense for you. We need to think more. Entrepreneurs need to think more about entrepreneur product match. That's a totally different conversation that we should have on it.
So interesting, actually, because what you're saying is, be careful what you get good at,
yes,
or where you develop a lot of experience for, because that ultimately could become handcuffs for where you stay.
I think one of the biggest mistakes I made in my entrepreneurial career is learning to code, being a software engineer. And the reason I say that is because learning to code put me in this really weird position in an organization where I was trying to build the product, but I was also, as the CEO, founder, I was selling the product. And so what happened is when I went into sales, I would geek out over my product. And that's, as we talked about, not how you're supposed to sell things. So I just wanted to talk about all the cool features because I had freaking built them. And I knew how cool they were and how hard they were. But guess what? That don't sell nothing.
I love that you bring this up, because one of the things that we made sure so we ran about 100-person SDR team, sales development rep team, when I was working for another company. And those are the people who are making 150 dials a day. I mean, this is insane. Like, nobody loves this job. Well, some people do, and they're built different than everybody else. But one thing that we made sure we didn't do is we never trained them on the product. So we trained them on the value that the product could bring, but we never trained them on the features of the product. The reason we didn't train them on the features of the product is because they would do exactly what you're talking about. They'd get on the phone and they'd start talking about all the features of this product, and they would essentially sell the person out of doing a demo because they knew enough to be dangerous, but didn't know enough to add, or they knew too much to just focus on the value and getting that person into an actual demo. So that was a very key thing that we learned pretty early on is, hey, you're going to geek out about it. And the second thing that I have found in doing my, in consulting with CEOs when it comes to sales, do you know what most CEOs are terrible at in the sales process?
No, tell me.
Shutting up. That is number one. So they'll get in there and they'll start talking about their product and all the bells and whistles and all the stories and all this kind of thing. And in an hour call, the potential customer has gotten maybe 5 minutes of speaking, and the CEO has gone on for 55 minutes. Do you know what that does to a deal? It torpedoes it. It kills it. So if you're listening and you're one of those CEOs or founders, I want you to put a chess clock next to you or a timer up on the screen or something so that each time you talk, you hit that chess clock and you watch it run. And if it's anywhere above 50% by the end of the time that the call's over, you have failed. Do it again next time and keep getting better at it, because that is one of the biggest things that CEOs do that sell themselves out of deals.
That was tip. No, that was the gold right there. That was the tip. This was great rapport building. Should we get to the podcast? I don't think we've recorded the podcast yet.
Oh man, yeah, we should probably start that now.
You want to welcome everyone, or I can do it. Welcome to ThoughtWave, everyone. We discuss tips, tricks, and hacks for audience builders, entrepreneurs, and people who just want to do things. I'm Dr. Dinin.
You are Dr. Dinin. I'm Chris Leithe. Thank you so much for listening today. And if you haven't already, like, subscribe, share it with your friends. This podcast was all about what is the best way to sell your product. What are the ins and outs? So if you know somebody in your network that's thinking about this right now, what are you going to do?
You're going to send it to them because they need help with sales. And we should do a series on sales. There's so much more we can talk about here.
That's an interesting idea. Well, if you want deeper dives into sales, leave some comments, send us an email. Go to aarondinin.com, send us a note. Go to audienceaccelerationlabs.com, send us a note there. You can find us and contact us. Let us know. With that, we'll see you next time.